When your wife fires you by email at 3 in the afternoon, you know romance isn't just wounded. It's been buried in a shallow corporate grave. I was in my home gym, working the heavy bag like it owed me money, when my phone buzzed against the weight rack. The message was short, professional, and colder than a handshake from the Grim Reaper. Your contract with Solace Corp has been terminated effective immediately. Please do not report to the office tomorrow. HR will contact you regarding final arrangements. E. Solace, Chief Executive Officer. Not love, Alara. Not even regards. Just the corporate signature she used with vendors and people she was about to crush under her designer heels. I unwrapped my hands slowly, letting the reality sink in. 23 years of marriage. 15 years building this company from nothing, and she fires me like I'm some intern who got caught stealing office supplies. My phone buzzed again. This time it wasn't corporate letterhead. This time it was personal. Your brother fits us better than you, in every way. Attached was a photo that made my stomach drop faster than our stock price during the .com crash. Rick, my own brother Rick, sitting behind my desk in my corner office, feet propped up on the mahogany surface I'd picked out myself. He was wearing one of those smug grins he'd perfected in high school, the same one he'd flash whenever he managed to steal my girlfriends or convince our parents that his latest screw-up was somehow my fault. But this wasn't high school anymore, and Rick wasn't just stealing a prom date. I stared at the photo until my vision blurred around the edges. Rick's cheap suit looked expensive in my executive chair. The morning light streaming through my windows made his thinning hair look almost distinguished. Even the coffee mug, my coffee mug, the one Alara gave me for our 10th anniversary, looked right in his hands. Guess I should have taken those team-building retreats more seriously, I muttered to the empty gym. My reflection stared back from the mirror wall, 45 years old and suddenly unemployed. Gray threading through dark hair, shoulders still broad from years of manual labor before the tech boom made me rich. I looked like what I was, a blue-collar guy who'd gotten lucky with computers and unlucky with family. The irony wasn't lost on me. I'd built Solace Corp from the ground up, writing code in our garage while Alara handled the business side. She had the MBA and the connections. I had the vision and the technical skills. We were supposed to be partners. But partnerships, like marriages, have a way of shifting when money gets involved. I walked upstairs to my study and pulled out the shareholder agreement from the fireproof safe. The document was thick, full of legal language that had seemed unnecessary when we drafted it. Back then, we were in love. Back then, we trusted each other. Back then, I wasn't naive enough to think that trust had an expiration date. I flipped to page 47, section 12, subsection C. The clause I'd insisted on including despite Alara's protests. She'd called it paranoid. I'd called it insurance. In the event of irreconcilable differences between founding shareholders, controlling interest shall revert to the shareholder holding the majority position, defined as 51% or greater of total company shares. My signature was right there next to Alara's, dated 15 years ago when we'd incorporated, back when she'd agreed to let me maintain 87% ownership in exchange for her handling all the business operations. 87%. I'd forgotten about that number over the years, gotten comfortable with the illusion that we were equal partners. But the paperwork didn't lie. On paper, Solace Corp belonged to me. My phone rang. Alara's name flashed on the screen. I let it go to voicemail. It rang again immediately. This time I answered. Jared, we need to talk. Her voice had that crisp, professional tone she used in board meetings. No emotion, no warmth, just business. Do we? I leaned back in my chair, the shareholder agreement spread across my desk like a roadmap to revenge. Because I think your text message covered everything pretty clearly. Don't be dramatic. This is just business. Business? I laughed, and it came out harsher than I'd intended. You're sleeping with my brother, Alara. You fired me from the company I built. What part of that is just business? The part where you haven't been actively involved in operations for 3 years. The part where Rick brings fresh ideas and energy to the leadership team. The part where you think I'm going to roll over and let you steal my life's work. Silence stretched between us like a taut wire. What do you want, Jared? I looked down at the shareholder agreement, at my signature authorizing 87% control of everything we'd built together. I want you to enjoy your new relationship, I said quietly. Both of you. That's surprisingly mature of you. Oh, I'm not finished. I stood up, walked to the window overlooking our driveway. Alara's BMW was gone, probably at Rick's apartment, or maybe they were celebrating at some expensive restaurant downtown. I'm filing for divorce tomorrow morning, and I'm claiming my controlling interest in Solace Corp. The silence this time was different, sharper. You can't do that. Actually, I can. 87% ownership, Alara. Check the paperwork. That was just a formality. We've operated as equal partners for 15 years. Funny how formalities matter when they're convenient, isn't it? I walked back to my desk, picked up the agreement. Remember when you insisted on that termination clause? The one that said either of us could fire employees without consultation? That seemed pretty formal when you used it this afternoon. Jared, please, let's discuss this rationally. I am being rational. Divorce filed, shares claimed, locks changed. I hung up before she could respond. The house felt different now, like the walls were holding their breath. I walked through rooms that had been ours and tried to figure out when they had stopped feeling like home. The kitchen where we'd planned our future over morning coffee. The living room where we'd celebrated our first million in revenue. The bedroom where we'd made promises we apparently had different definitions for. My phone buzzed with text messages. First from Alara, then Rick, then numbers I didn't recognize. Word was spreading fast through our social circle. The tech community in our city was small, and gossip traveled faster than fiber optic cables. I ignored them all. Instead, I called my lawyer. Tom, it's Jared Solis. I need you to file divorce papers first thing tomorrow morning, and I need you to review the Solis Corp shareholder agreement, specifically Section 12. Tom Bradley had handled our corporate legal work for a decade. He knew where all the bodies were buried, metaphorically speaking. Jesus, Jared, what happened? My wife decided she preferred my brother's management style. Tom had been practicing family law long enough to read between those lines. How messy are we talking? Chernobyl messy, but clean from a legal standpoint. I want everything done by the book. I'll start the paperwork tonight. The shareholder clause, you're talking about the controlling interest provision? That's the one. Jared, that's going to trigger a corporate earthquake. Solis Corp has over 200 employees, major contracts, investor relationships. I know what it's going to trigger, Tom. File the papers. After I hung up, I poured myself 3 fingers of bourbon and sat in my study until the sun went down. The house grew dark around me, but I didn't turn on any lights. I just sat there, thinking about trust and betrayal and the thin line between love and business. My phone kept buzzing. Messages, calls, emails, the digital equivalent of people rubbernecking at a car accident. Around midnight, I heard a car in the driveway, footsteps on the front porch, the sound of a key in the lock that didn't turn because I'd already changed it. Alara's voice carried through the door. Jared, open up. We need to talk about this. I didn't answer. I know you're in there. Your car is in the garage. Still nothing. This is ridiculous. It's my house, too. I walked to the front door but didn't open it. Not anymore, I said through the wood. Community property gets divided in divorce proceedings. But the house is paid for with company funds. Company I own 87% of. You can't lock me out of my own home. Watch me. I heard her heels clicking on the porch as she paced. Then the sound of her phone, probably calling Tom's office, probably getting his voicemail. Jared, please, let's be adults about this. Adults don't screw their husband's brother, Alara. Adults don't fire their spouse by email. Adults don't send gloating text messages with pictures. Her footsteps stopped. I was angry. You've been checked out for months, barely showing up to the office, letting Rick handle all the technical decisions. Rick couldn't code his way out of a paper bag. The only technical decision he's qualified to make is whether to use Internet Explorer or Chrome. He's been learning. He's motivated. I bet he is. Another long silence. What do you want, Jared? Money? A settlement? Name your price. I leaned my forehead against the door. 23 years of marriage, and she thought this was about money. I want you to go to Rick's apartment. I want you to explain to him that his new job comes with some complications. And I want you both to think very carefully about what happens next. What's that supposed to mean? It means I'll see you at the board meeting tomorrow afternoon, assuming you still have the authority to call one. I walked away from the door and went upstairs. From my bedroom window, I watched Alara stand on the porch for another 10 minutes before finally getting back in her car and driving away. The house was quiet again. I opened my laptop and started typing. The next morning arrived like a process server, unwelcome but inevitable. I was up at 5, not because I'd slept well, but because lying in bed pretending to sleep had lost its appeal around 3 a.m. The coffee tasted like burnt revenge, and the morning news was full of the usual disasters that made my personal catastrophe seem almost quaint by comparison. My phone had accumulated 47 missed calls overnight. Alara, Rick, various board members, and at least a dozen reporters who'd somehow gotten wind that Solace Corp was imploding. News traveled fast in the tech world, especially when it involved family drama and corporate intrigue. I ignored them all and focused on my morning routine. Shower, shave, the good suit, the charcoal gray one I'd worn to our IPO announcement 5 years ago. If I was going to destroy everything I'd built, I might as well look professional doing it. Tom called at 7:30. "Papers are filed," he said without preamble. "Divorce petition, shareholder action, and a formal notice to the board of directors. I also took the liberty of freezing all joint accounts pending asset division." "How long before the board gets the notice?" "They should have it within the hour. Jared, are you sure about this? Once you trigger that shareholder clause, there's no going back. The company will be in chaos." "The company is already in chaos, Tom. I'm just making it official." "Alara's lawyer called me 20 minutes ago. She wants to negotiate." "I'm sure she does. What did you tell him?" "That my client isn't interested in negotiations at this time." "Good. What else?" "She's planning to call an emergency board meeting this afternoon. Probably going to try to paint you as a disgruntled employee acting out of spite." "Let her try. Did you send the shareholder documentation to the board?" "Hand-delivered to each member an hour ago, along with copies of the original incorporation papers and every amendment since." I smiled for the first time in 24 hours. I love it when a plan comes together. "This isn't a plan, Jared. This is mutually assured destruction." "Sometimes that's the same thing." After I hung up, I drove to Mike's gym downtown. Mike Rizzo had been my boxing coach for 10 years, back when I'd thought physical fitness might compensate for the stress of running a tech company. He was old school, a former Golden Gloves champion who'd never met a problem he couldn't solve with hard work and harder punches. The gym was nearly empty at 8 a.m., just a few dedicated masochists working the heavy bags and speed bags. Mike was in his office, reading the sports page and drinking coffee that could strip paint. "Well, well," he said when I walked in. "If it isn't the tech mogul. Heard you had some excitement yesterday." "News travels fast." "Faster when it involves your wife banging your brother." Mike folded his newspaper and leaned back in his chair. "What are you going to do about it?" "I'm going to take my company back." "That's a start. What about Rick?" "What about him?" "You going to let him walk away from this, after what he did?" I sat down across from Mike's desk. The office smelled like leather and sweat and decades of ambition. Framed photos on the walls showed Mike with various fighters he'd trained, including a few who'd made it to the professional level. "Violence isn't the answer, Mike." "Who said anything about violence? I'm talking about justice. There's a difference." "Is there?" "Violence is what you do when you're angry. Justice is what you do when you're thinking clearly." Mike leaned forward. "Which one are you right now?" I thought about it. The rage from yesterday had settled into something colder, more focused, like the difference between a wildfire and a laser. "I'm thinking clearly." "Good. Then think about this. Your brother didn't just steal your wife. He stole your life's work, your employees, your reputation, your future. You going to let him keep all that?" "The shareholder agreement gives me controlling interest. I can remove him from any position in the company." "And then what? He walks away with your wife and whatever money she's already moved around, starts over somewhere else while you're left cleaning up the mess?" I hadn't thought about that. In my focus on the immediate corporate coup, I'd overlooked the longer-term implications. Rick wasn't just an employee I could fire. He was family. He knew our business model, our client relationships, our strategic plans. If he and Alara decided to start a competing company? "What are you suggesting?" Mike smiled, and it wasn't entirely pleasant. "I'm suggesting you think like a chess player instead of a checkers player. Don't just take back what's yours. Make sure they can't take it away again." I left the gym with a new perspective and a growing sense that this was going to get much more complicated before it got simpler. The Solace Corp building was a gleaming tower of glass and steel in the heart of downtown, 37 floors of ambition and achievement that I'd helped design. The lobby was marble and chrome, with our company logo etched into the wall behind the reception desk. It had always made me proud to walk through those doors. Today, it felt like entering enemy territory. The security guard at the front desk looked uncomfortable when he saw me. "Mr. Solace, I wasn't sure if you'd be coming in today." "Why wouldn't I be coming in, Marcus?" "Well, sir, there was a memo yesterday about the change in your employment status." "I see. And what did that memo say exactly?" Marcus shifted in his chair. He'd been working security here for 8 years, had always been friendly and professional. Now he looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. "It said that your access to the building had been revoked pending Pending resolution of some personnel matters. Personnel matters. I nodded thoughtfully. Marcus, do you know what a shareholder is? Yes, sir. Someone who owns part of the company. That's right. And do you know how much of this company I own? No, sir. I pulled out my copy of the shareholder agreement and placed it on his desk. 87%, Marcus, which means I own this building, those elevators, and technically, your paycheck. Marcus stared at the document like it might bite him. Now, I'm going up to the 35th floor for the board meeting. If anyone has a problem with that, they can take it up with building security. That would be you. Yes, sir, Mr. Solis. No problem at all. The elevator ride to the 35th floor gave me 2 minutes to prepare for what was coming. The boardroom was at the end of the hall, a conference room with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. I'd sat in thousands of meetings in that room, making decisions that affected hundreds of employees and millions of dollars in revenue. Today, I was going to make the biggest decision of my corporate career. The boardroom was already full when I arrived. 7 board members, plus Ilara at the head of the table and Rick sitting in what used to be my chair. The conversation stopped when I walked in, like someone had hit a pause button on a very uncomfortable movie. Jared, Ilara's voice was carefully neutral. I wasn't sure you'd be joining us. Wouldn't miss it for the world. I took the empty chair at the far end of the table, directly opposite Ilara. I see Rick's already making himself comfortable. Rick had the decency to look embarrassed, but he didn't move from my chair. He was wearing a new suit, something expensive that probably cost more than he'd made in the last 6 months. Ilara's influence was already showing. Before we begin, said Linda Voss, the board's senior independent director, I think we should address the elephant in the room. Jared, we received some rather disturbing legal documents this morning. I'm sure you did? A divorce filing, a shareholder action, and what appears to be a claim for controlling interest in the company. Linda was in her 60s, old money and older attitudes. She'd always treated me like hired help who'd gotten above his station. This is highly irregular. What's irregular is firing the majority shareholder without board approval. You weren't fired as a shareholder, Ilara interjected. You were terminated as an employee. There's a difference. Is there? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you removed me from operational control of my own company and installed your... What's the appropriate corporate term for your relationship with Rick? The temperature in the room dropped several degrees. That's enough, Linda said sharply. Personal matters have no place in a board meeting. I agree completely. I opened my briefcase and pulled out a stack of documents. So let's focus on business matters. Tom, would you join us? Tom Bradley walked into the boardroom carrying his own briefcase and wearing his most serious lawyer expression. He'd been Solace Corp's legal counsel for a decade, but today he was working for me personally. Ladies and gentlemen, Tom said, distributing copies of the shareholder agreement to each board member, I'd like to direct your attention to Section 12 of the company's founding documents. I watched their faces as they read the controlling interest clause. Linda's expression went from annoyance to alarm. The other board members looked like they were trying to solve a complex math problem in their heads. This is preposterous, Ilara said. We've operated as equal partners for 15 years. Operating as equal partners and being equal partners are two different things, Tom replied. The legal structure of the company is quite clear. Mr. Solis holds 87% of all shares, giving him controlling interest and ultimate authority over corporate decisions. Including personnel decisions, asked board member David Chen. Including personnel decisions. Rick finally spoke up. You can't just waltz in here and take over. The company has contracts, obligations, employees who depend on stable leadership. Stable leadership. I looked at Rick with what I hoped was paternal patience. Tell me, Rick, what exactly qualifies you to run a technology company? Your degree in communications, your 3 years selling insurance, your extensive background in software development. I've been learning. From who? Because it certainly wasn't from me. In fact, I don't recall having a single technical conversation with you in the past year. Ilara has been bringing me up to speed. Ilara has an MBA in marketing. Her idea of technical innovation is changing the font on our letterhead. That's enough, Ilara snapped. This is exactly why we made the change. You've been dismissive and condescending for months. The company needs fresh leadership, new ideas. The company needs competent leadership, and since I own 87% of it, I get to decide what that looks like. I stood up and walked to the whiteboard at the front of the room. In blue marker, I wrote motion in large letters. I moved to remove Ilara Solis as Chief Executive Officer, effective immediately. You can't do that, Linda protested. Actually, he can, Tom said quietly. Controlling shareholder has the authority to make executive personnel decisions. I second the motion, I said. All in favor? I raised my hand. This is ridiculous, Alara said. You can't vote your own motion. Watch me. Motion carries, 1 vote in favor, 0 opposed. Alara, you're fired. The silence in the room was deafening. Furthermore, I continued, I moved to remove Rick Salas from all positions within the company, effective immediately. Now wait just a minute. Rick started to stand. Sit down, Rick. You're not a board member, you're not a shareholder, and as of right now, you're not an employee. You have no standing in this meeting. Rick looked around the table for support, but the board members were all staring at their copies of the shareholder agreement like it might suddenly change. Motion carries, I said. Rick, security will escort you out. You can't do this to family, Rick said, and for the first time he sounded genuinely hurt rather than just angry. You're right, I replied. Family shouldn't do this to each other, but you did it first. I walked back to my seat and sat down. The board members were looking at each other with expressions ranging from shock to admiration to terror. Now then, I said pleasantly, let's talk about the future of Solace Corp. The aftermath of a corporate coup is like the aftermath of a natural disaster. Lots of debris, lots of confusion, and lots of people trying to figure out what just happened. Within an hour of the board meeting, word had spread throughout the building that there had been a change in leadership. The executive assistant pool was buzzing with rumors. The IT department was placing bets on whether the company would survive the week. The accounting team was probably already updating their resumes. I spent the rest of the afternoon in my old office, my office again now, fielding calls from investors, clients, and reporters. The stock price had dropped 12% in the first hour of trading after news of the management restructuring. Hit the financial news sites. Tom stayed with me, handling the legal implications of what we'd just done. There would be lawsuits, almost certainly. Wrongful termination claims, breach of fiduciary duty allegations, maybe even some creative attempts to challenge the shareholder agreement itself. How bad is this going to get? I asked him around 4 o'clock. Depends on how smart Alara's attorney is and how much money she's willing to spend on litigation. Tom was reviewing contracts, looking for potential legal landmines. The good news is that your position is legally sound. The bad news is that legal and practical are 2 different things. Meaning? Meaning you just fired the CEO and the COO of a $200 million company in the same afternoon. The market doesn't like uncertainty, and your employees don't like chaos. You need to stabilize things quickly, or you won't have a company left to control. He was right, of course. I'd won the battle, but the war was just beginning. My phone buzzed with a text message from Alara. We need to talk. Privately. I showed it to Tom. Don't, he said immediately. Anything you say to her now can be used against you later. Let the lawyers handle communication. She's still my wife. She's your soon-to-be ex-wife who just tried to steal your company. There's a difference. I knew he was right, but 23 years of marriage doesn't disappear overnight, even when it ends with corporate warfare. Part of me still wanted to understand how we'd gotten here, how the woman I'd loved enough to build a life with had turned into someone I barely recognized. But Tom was right. This wasn't about understanding anymore. This was about survival. At 6 o'clock, I finally left the office and drove home to a house that felt more like a fortress than a residence. I'd had the locks changed on all the doors, installed a new security system, and arranged for a patrol service to drive by twice a night. It seemed like overkill until I found Rick's car parked across the street. He was sitting behind the wheel, staring at the house like he was trying to solve a puzzle. When he saw me pull into the driveway, he got out and walked over. We need to talk, he said. No, we don't. Jared, please. This has gotten out of hand. I looked at my brother, really looked at him, for the first time in months. Rick was 3 years younger than me, but he'd always seemed older somehow. More sophisticated, more charming, more willing to take shortcuts to get what he wanted. Growing up, our parents had called him the people person, and me the technical one, like we were different models of the same product designed for different markets. Out of hand? I unlocked my front door but didn't invite him in. Rick, you've been screwing my wife and plotting to steal my company. Exactly which part of that was supposed to stay in hand? It wasn't supposed to happen like this. How was it supposed to happen? Rick ran his hands through his thinning hair. He looked older than his 42 years, like the stress of the last few days had aged him in fast forward. Alara said you were checked out, that you didn't care about the company anymore. She said you'd be relieved to step back, maybe take a consulting role. And you believed her? I wanted to believe her. Rick's voice cracked slightly. Do you know what it's like being your brother, Jared? Do you know what it's like growing up in the shadow of someone who's better at everything? Better at everything? Rick, I've spent my entire adult life trying to help you. I got you jobs, loaned you money, bailed you out of more scrapes than I can count, and reminded me of it every single time. Rick's composure was starting to crack. Every family dinner, every holiday, every conversation we had was a reminder that you were the successful one and I was the screw-up. So you decided to screw my wife and steal my company? That was your solution to feeling inadequate? It wasn't supposed to be like that. Alara and I, we connected. She understood what it was like to feel overlooked, underappreciated. Underappreciated? I stared at him in disbelief. Rick, she was the CEO of a $200 million company. How much more appreciation did she need? Not by the board, not by the investors. By you. Rick stepped closer, and I could smell alcohol on his breath. When was the last time you told her she was doing a good job? When was the last time you acted like her opinion mattered? The question hit harder than I'd expected because I couldn't immediately answer it. When had I last complimented Alara's work? When had I last asked for her advice on something important? That doesn't justify what you did? No, it doesn't, but it explains it. Rick leaned against my car, suddenly looking exhausted. I never meant for it to go this far. It started as just comfort. Someone to talk to who understood what it was like to feel invisible in your orbit. And then it became what? Love? Rick was quiet for a long moment. I don't know what it became, but it became something that felt real, something that felt like it belonged to me instead of being handed down from my successful older brother. I felt a flicker of something that might have been sympathy, but it was quickly overwhelmed by anger. So you decided to take everything that belonged to me. We decided to build something that belonged to us. With my company, with my employees, with my money. With your wife, Rick said quietly. The words hung in the air between us like a challenge. Yeah, I said finally. With my wife. We stood there in my driveway, two brothers who'd just destroyed their relationship over a woman and a company, and I tried to figure out if there was any way back from this. There wasn't. I'm sorry, Rick said. For what it's worth, I'm sorry it happened this way. But not sorry it happened. No, not sorry it happened. I nodded. At least he was being honest. Then we're done here. Rick pushed himself off my car and started walking back toward his own. Halfway there, he turned around. She really did love you, you know. For a long time, she really did love you. But not anymore. No, not anymore. After Rick drove away, I went inside and poured myself a drink that was larger than it should have been and smaller than I wanted. The house felt different now, like the conversation with Rick had changed something fundamental about the space. I was halfway through the drink when my phone rang. Alara's name on the caller ID. Against Tom's advice, I answered. Hello, Alara. Jared, we need to end this. It's destroying everything we built together. No, what you did with Rick destroyed everything we built together. I'm just cleaning up the mess. This isn't cleaning up, this is revenge. Is it? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like justice. Justice? Alara's voice rose. You fired me from my own company. You locked me out of my own house. You froze our joint accounts so I can't even pay my credit card bills. How is that justice? Your company? Your house? I set my drink down harder than necessary. Alara, I built that company from nothing. I wrote the code, I designed the systems, I created the intellectual property that made us millions. You handled marketing and operations, and you did it well, but it was never your company. We were partners. We were married. There's a difference. Not to me. Well, maybe that was the problem. Silence stretched between us, filled with 15 years of shared history and 24 hours of mutual destruction. What do you want? Alara asked finally. Money? A settlement? What's it going to take to end this? I want my company back. I want my house back. I want my life back. And Rick? Rick made his choice. He can live with the consequences. He loves me. Maybe he does, but love doesn't entitle him to my life's work. And what about me? Do I get to live with the consequences too? I thought about that question. 23 years of marriage, 15 years of building a business together, thousands of shared moments that had seemed important at the time. You made your choice too, Alara. You chose Rick over me, and you chose betrayal over honesty. Those choices have consequences. I never wanted it to end like this. Then you shouldn't have started it. I hung up before she could respond. The house was quiet again, but it was a different kind of quiet now. Not the oppressive silence of abandonment, but the peaceful quiet of a space that finally belonged to me alone. I finished my drink and went to bed in a house where all the locks had been changed and all the passwords had been reset. Tomorrow, I'd start the process of rebuilding Solace Corp without the two people who'd tried to steal it from me. Tonight, I slept better than I had in months. 3 weeks after the corporate coup, I was beginning to understand the difference between winning a war and surviving the victory. Solace Corp was still standing, but barely. We'd lost 2 major clients who didn't like the instability of our management change. 3 department heads had resigned, probably figuring their loyalty to Alara made their positions untenable. The stock price had stabilized, but at about 15% below where it had been before the chaos started. On the positive side, I'd discovered that my employees were more adaptable than I'd given them credit for. The development team was actually relieved to have me back in active leadership. Apparently, Rick's fresh ideas had mostly involved suggesting we rebuild our entire software platform using whatever technology he'd read about in the latest issue of Wired magazine. I was in my office at 7 a.m., reviewing quarterly projections and drinking coffee that had been brewed strong enough to wake the recently deceased, when my assistant knocked on the door. "Mr. Solace? There's a reporter here from Tech Weekly. She says she has an appointment." I checked my calendar. Sure enough, there it was. Jennifer Morrison, Tech Weekly, 7:30 a.m. I'd forgotten about the interview I'd scheduled the week before, back when I'd thought having positive press coverage might help stabilize the company's reputation. Now I wasn't so sure I wanted to talk to reporters about my personal life masquerading as business news. "Send her in." Jennifer Morrison was younger than I'd expected, probably early 30s, with the kind of sharp intelligence that made me think she'd done her homework before walking into my office. She carried a digital recorder and a notepad, old school tools in a digital world. "Mr. Solace, thank you for making time this morning. I know it's been a challenging few weeks." "That's one way to put it." She smiled and set her recorder on my desk. "Do you mind if I record our conversation?" "Go ahead." "Let's start with the obvious question. 3 weeks ago, you fired your wife and brother from executive positions at Solace Corp. From the outside, this looks like a family dispute that spilled over into the corporate world. How do you respond to that characterization?" I'd been expecting this question, but hearing it asked directly still felt like a punch to the stomach. I'd respond by saying that characterization has it backwards. This wasn't a family dispute that affected the company. This was a corporate governance issue that happened to involve family members. Can you elaborate on that? Solace Corp is a business, not a family enterprise. When personal relationships start affecting business decisions, those relationships become a corporate governance problem. I dealt with it the same way any responsible majority shareholder would. By firing your wife and brother. By removing executives who were no longer acting in the company's best interests. Jennifer made notes on her pad. Your estranged wife, Alara Solace, has been quoted as saying that you've always been a silent partner in the business, that she and Rick brought operational expertise that you lacked. How do you respond to that? I'd respond by pointing to our financial performance over the past 15 years. Solace Corp has grown from a 2-person startup to a company with over 200 employees and annual revenue exceeding $200 million. That doesn't happen by accident, and it doesn't happen without strong technical leadership. But Alara handled the business operations. Alara handled marketing and client relations, and she did those jobs well. But the core intellectual property of this company, the software platforms, the technical innovations, the development processes that generate our revenue, those came from me and my team. And Rick? Rick was COO for approximately 6 months. Before that, he had no experience in the technology sector. I'll let the market judge whether his contributions justified his position. Jennifer nodded and made more notes. There are rumors that the management change was motivated by personal rather than professional concerns. Specifically that you discovered your wife and brother were having an affair. There it was, the question I'd been dreading and preparing for in equal measure. I don't comment on personal matters in business interviews. But surely you understand that the personal and professional are intertwined here. The optics are simple. I own 87% of Solace Corp. I have a fiduciary responsibility to shareholders, employees, and clients to ensure the company is run competently and ethically. When that wasn't happening, I made changes. Even if those changes involved family members? Especially if they involved family members. Family relationships don't exempt anyone from professional accountability. Jennifer leaned back in her chair, studying me with the intensity of someone trying to read between the lines. How do you respond to critics who say you've damaged the company's reputation and stability for the sake of personal revenge? The question hung in the air like smoke from a house fire. I could give her the corporate-approved answer about fiduciary responsibility and governance principles, or I could tell her the truth. I'd say those critics have it backwards, I said finally. The damage to the company's reputation came from having executives who put personal interests ahead of professional responsibilities. I'm trying to repair that damage. By taking complete control of the company? By ensuring the company is run by people who understand the difference between personal and professional relationships. After Jennifer left, I sat in my office and wondered if I'd handled the interview well, or if I'd just created more problems for myself. In the technology world, reputation mattered almost as much as results, and mine was currently somewhere between controversial and radioactive. My phone buzzed with a text from Tom. Alara's attorney filed a motion challenging the shareholder agreement, hearing scheduled for next Friday. I wasn't surprised. Alara had been remarkably quiet for the past 2 weeks, which had made me more nervous than if she'd been calling me every day. Quiet meant she was planning something, and Alara's plans were usually thorough and unpleasant. I called Tom back. What's the basis for the challenge? They're claiming the 87% ownership structure was fraudulent from the beginning, that it was designed to circumvent equal partnership agreements you had made verbally. We have documentation going back 15 years. They're claiming the documentation was coercive, that Alara signed under duress because she was financially dependent on you at the time. That's ridiculous. She had her own lawyer review everything. Her lawyer 15 years ago, who, coincidentally, is now retired and living in Florida with early-stage dementia. I closed my eyes and rubbed my temples. Alara wasn't just challenging the shareholder agreement, she was trying to rewrite the entire history of our business relationship. How strong is their case? Weak on the merits, but potentially strong on the optics. You're a wealthy tech executive who just fired his wife and brother in what looks like a fit of personal revenge. She's a betrayed spouse fighting for her fair share of the company she helped build. Guess which story plays better with a jury? What do you recommend? Settlement. Give her a substantial payout, maybe 10 or 15 million, and make this go away before it gets uglier. Absolutely not. Jared, Tom, if I settle now, it validates everything she's claiming. It makes me look guilty of exactly what she's accusing me of. And it sets a precedent that personal relationships can override corporate governance. Sometimes looking guilty is better than being financially ruined. Not this time. After I hung up, I walked to the window and looked out at the city skyline. Somewhere out there, Alara was probably meeting with her lawyers, planning her next move in what had become a very public chess match. Rick was probably updating his resume and trying to figure out how to explain his brief tenure as COO of a company that had fired him for sleeping with the CEO. And I was standing in my office, looking out at a view I'd worked 15 years to earn, wondering if I was about to lose everything I'd built in the name of principles that might not matter to anyone but me. My assistant's voice came through the intercom. Mr. Solis, your 2 o'clock appointment is here. I'd forgotten about the 2 o'clock. I checked my calendar. Linda Voss, board meeting. Linda was the senior independent director, old money and older attitudes, who'd never quite approved of my blue-collar background or unconventional management style. If she was requesting a private meeting, it probably wasn't to congratulate me on my recent corporate leadership. Send her in. Linda Voss entered my office like she was inspecting a property she was considering purchasing, but probably wouldn't. She was dressed in what I'd come to think of as her serious business outfit, a navy suit that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary and jewelry that was expensive enough to be tasteful. Jared, thank you for making time. Of course. What can I do for you, Linda? She sat down across from my desk and crossed her legs with the precision of someone who'd been attending board meetings since before I'd learned to code. I'll be direct. The board is concerned about the company's direction. What specifically concerns them? The instability, the negative press coverage, the legal challenges, the drop in stock price. Linda ticked off each item like she was reading from a shopping list. This company has always prided itself on steady, professional leadership. Recent events have called that reputation into question. Recent events were necessary to restore professional leadership. Were they? Because from where the board sits, it looks like you've prioritized personal grievances over corporate stability. I leaned back in my chair. This was the conversation I'd been expecting since the day I'd fired Alara and Rick, but I'd hoped it would take longer to materialize. Linda, what exactly is the board's position? The board believes it would be in everyone's best interest if you considered stepping back from day-to-day operations, perhaps taking a chairman role while we bring in a professional CEO to manage the transition. A professional CEO? Someone without personal entanglements. Someone who can focus purely on business considerations. Someone who isn't me. Linda's expression didn't change, but her silence was answer enough. I appreciate the board's concern, I said carefully, but I'm not interested in stepping back from operational control of my own company. Your company? My company. 87% ownership, remember? Ownership that's currently being challenged in court. By my estranged wife, who's trying to rewrite 15 years of corporate history because she got caught cheating. Linda's composure cracked slightly. Jared, I understand you're angry. You have every right to be angry, but you're letting that anger drive business decisions. And that's exactly the kind of behavior that concerns the board. What concerns me is a board that's more worried about appearances than about competent leadership. Competent leadership doesn't create the kind of chaos we've seen in the past month. Competent leadership deals with problems when they arise, even when those problems involve family members. Linda stood up, smoothing her skirt with the kind of deliberate motion that suggested our conversation was over. I hope you'll reconsider the board's recommendation for the good of the company. I'll take it under advisement. After Linda left, I sat in my office and tried to calculate how many enemies I'd accumulated in the past month. Alara, Rick, the board of directors, probably half the local tech community, and anyone else who thought I'd handled the situation badly. The funny thing was, I wasn't sure I disagreed with them. 2 days before the court hearing that would determine whether I kept control of my own company, I received an email that changed everything. It was from someone named David Park, a name I didn't recognize, sent to my personal email address rather than my corporate account. The subject line read, "Information you need to see." I almost deleted it as spam, but something about the timing made me curious. I opened it. Mr. Solis, I worked for Alara as a contractor 6 months ago, helping set up some financial structures for what she said was a new business venture. After seeing the news about your situation, I think you should know what I helped her create. Can we meet? This is bigger than just an affair. I stared at the email for 10 minutes, trying to decide if it was legitimate or some kind of trap. In the end, curiosity won over caution. I called the number he'd provided. David Park. This is Jared Solis. You sent me an email. Mr. Solis, thank you for calling. I wasn't sure you would. What kind of financial structures are we talking about? The kind that are designed to move corporate assets without leaving obvious paper trails. Shell companies, offshore accounts, intellectual property transfers. Your wife was very specific about what she needed. My stomach dropped. When did this start? About 8 months ago. She said she was planning a new venture and needed to structure some investments. I didn't think much of it at the time. Executives do this kind of thing all the time for tax planning and asset protection. But now you think it was something else. Now I think she was planning to strip assets out of Solis Corp and transfer them to entities she controlled independently. I closed my eyes and tried to process what he was telling me. Alara hadn't just been having an affair with Rick. She'd been planning a corporate heist. Can you prove this? I have copies of everything. Bank records, incorporation documents, IP transfer agreements. She had me structure it so that key pieces of your software platform would be transferred to a company she controlled, supposedly for licensing purposes. Jesus. Mr. Solis, if she'd been able to complete the transfers, she could have walked away with the core intellectual property of your company. Rick's hiring, your termination, the affair, I think all of it was designed to distract you while she moved assets. I met David Park at a coffee shop downtown, in a corner booth where we could talk without being overheard. He was younger than I'd expected, probably early 30s, with the nervous energy of someone who'd gotten in over his head and was trying to find a way out. I need you to understand, he said after we'd ordered coffee. I had no idea what she was really planning. She presented everything as legitimate business planning. Show me what you have. David opened his laptop and pulled up a series of documents. Bank account records showing regular transfers from Solis Corp to a shell company called Innovative Solutions, LLC. Intellectual property transfer agreements that would have moved our core software platforms to the same shell company. Corporate filings showing Alara as the sole owner of Innovative Solutions. When were these transfers supposed to happen? The IP transfers were scheduled for next month. The final asset transfers were set up to trigger automatically if certain conditions were met. What conditions? If you were removed from operational control of Solis Corp, either by termination or by legal action. I stared at the documents, trying to wrap my mind around the scope of what Alara had planned. This wasn't just about replacing me with Rick. This was about stealing the company from the inside, piece by piece, until there was nothing left but an empty corporate shell. Why are you telling me this? David looked uncomfortable. Because I'm not a criminal, Mr. Solis. When I realized what she'd really been planning, I couldn't be part of it. And because she stiffed me on the final payment for my services. She didn't pay you? She said the project was on hold due to unforeseen complications. That was right after news of your corporate coup hit the business press. I almost smiled. Even in the middle of trying to steal my company, Alara was cutting corners on expenses. I need copies of everything. I brought them. David handed me a flash drive. Bank records, corporate filings, email communications, the whole thing. Will you testify to this in court? If I have to. But I'd prefer to avoid getting dragged into your family drama, if possible. This isn't family drama anymore. This is corporate fraud. I spent the rest of the afternoon with Tom, going through David Park's documents and trying to understand the full scope of Alara's plan. The more we dug into the details, the more impressed and horrified I became. She's good, Tom said, reviewing the IP transfer agreements. These documents are technically legal, structured as licensing deals that would have been hard to challenge after the fact. But they would have given her control of our core software platforms. Complete control, and look at this. Tom pointed to a clause buried in the middle of one of the agreements. If Solace Corp defaulted on any of these licensing payments, ownership of the intellectual property would revert permanently to Innovative Solutions. Meaning she could have bankrupted Solace Corp and walked away with all our assets? Exactly. I leaned back in my chair, trying to process the magnitude of what we'd discovered. Alara hadn't just been cheating on me, she'd been planning to destroy me. This changes everything about the court hearing. It changes everything about everything, Tom agreed. The question is, how do you want to play it? I thought about that question for a long time. I could use David's information to destroy Alara in court, to prove that she'd been planning corporate fraud long before I'd discovered her affair with Rick. It would probably guarantee that I kept control of Solace Corp, and it might even result in criminal charges against her. But it would also destroy any possibility of ending the situation quietly. It would turn our divorce into a public spectacle, complete with fraud investigations and criminal trials. It would damage the company's reputation even further, and it would probably destroy what was left of our family relationships. On the other hand, if I didn't use the information, there was a real chance that Alara's legal challenge would succeed. She could end up with partial control of Solace Corp, and I'd never be sure whether she'd try something like this again. I want to talk to her first. Jared, that's a terrible idea. Maybe. But I want to give her a chance to explain this before I destroy her in court. She tried to steal your company. I know. But she was also my wife for 23 years. I owe her at least a conversation. Tom shook his head. You don't owe her anything. But if you're determined to do this, at least let me be there as a witness. No. This needs to be just between us. I called Alara that evening and asked her to meet me at the house. Our house, technically, though she hadn't been there since the night I'd changed the locks. She agreed, probably thinking it meant I was ready to negotiate a settlement. She arrived at 8 o'clock, dressed in the kind of understated, elegant outfit she wore when she wanted to look sympathetic but professional. She looked tired, older than her 43 years, like the stress of the past month had aged her in fast forward. Thank you for agreeing to meet, she said as I led her into the living room. We need to talk. I'm glad you finally realized that. I gestured for her to sit down on the couch while I took the chair across from her. The living room felt strange with both of us in it, like we were actors performing in a play about our former life. I know about Innovative Solutions, I said without preamble. Alara's expression didn't change, but something shifted behind her eyes. I don't know what you mean. I know about the shell company. I know about the IP transfers. I know about the plan to strip assets out of Solace Corp. I pulled out copies of David Park's documents and placed them on the coffee table between us. I know everything, Alara. She looked down at the documents for a long moment, then back up at me. How long have you known? 2 days? And you wanted to confront me before the hearing. I wanted to understand why. Alara was quiet for several minutes, staring at the documents like they might disappear if she looked at them long enough. Because I was tired of being a junior partner in my own life, she said finally. Your own life? Everything we built, everything we achieved, it was always your company, your vision, your success. I was just the supporting actress in the Jared Solace story. That's not true. Isn't it? When reporters interviewed us, they talked to you about the technology and asked me about work-life balance. When investors came to meetings, they shook your hand and smiled politely at me. When employees had problems, they came to you, even when those problems were supposed to be my responsibility. I started to object, but she held up her hand. I'm not saying you did it intentionally, but you never saw me as an equal partner, Jared. You saw me as a very competent employee who happened to share your bed. So you decided to steal the company? I decided to build something that would be mine. Rick was part of that, but he wasn't the whole thing. The whole thing was creating a business where I wouldn't always be playing second fiddle to someone else's vision. By committing corporate fraud, by using the same aggressive business tactics that every successful tech company uses. You think Google and Apple and Microsoft got where they are by playing nice? I stared at her, trying to reconcile this cold, calculating woman with the person I'd been married to for over 2 decades. What about Rick? What about him? Do you love him? Alara considered the question seriously. I love the way he makes me feel, like I'm the most important person in the room, like my opinions matter, like I'm not just a supporting character in someone else's story. And that was worth destroying our marriage? Our marriage was already over, Jared. It had been over for years. We just hadn't admitted it yet. We sat in silence for a while, surrounded by the wreckage of 23 years of shared history. What happens now? Alara asked finally. I looked at the documents on the coffee table, evidence of a betrayal that went far deeper than adultery. Now you withdraw your legal challenge to the shareholder agreement. And if I don't, then I give these documents to the district attorney and let them decide whether to file criminal charges for corporate fraud. Alara's composure finally cracked. You would really do that? You would really destroy me? You tried to destroy me first. I tried to build something for myself. By stealing from me. By taking what I thought I deserved. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the neighborhood where we'd lived for 10 years. Normal houses with normal families dealing with normal problems. You could have asked for a bigger role in the company. You could have negotiated for more equity. You could have started your own business with your own money. With what money? Everything we have is tied up in Solace Corp, and you control Solace Corp. We could have worked something out. Could we? When was the last time you asked my opinion about a major business decision? When was the last time you treated me like an equal partner instead of a very expensive employee? I turned back to face her. When was the last time you told me you were unhappy instead of planning to steal my life's work? Would you have listened? The question hung in the air between us like a challenge. I wanted to say yes, that of course I would have listened, that of course I would have taken her concerns seriously, but I wasn't sure that was true. I guess we'll never know, I said finally. Alara stood up and smoothed her skirt, the same deliberate gesture I'd seen her make 1,000 times in business meetings when she'd made a decision. I'll withdraw the legal challenge. And innovative solutions? I'll dissolve the company and return any assets that were transferred. And Rick? Rick made his own choices. He can live with the consequences. She walked toward the door, then stopped and turned back. For what it's worth, I really did love you. For a long time, I really did love you. I know. But not enough to talk to me instead of betraying me. No, not enough for that. After Alara left, I sat in the living room for a long time, thinking about marriage and partnership and the difference between love and respect. 23 years of shared history, reduced to a stack of legal documents and a conversation about corporate fraud. The next morning, Tom called to tell me that Alara's attorney had withdrawn the legal challenge to the shareholder agreement. The court hearing was canceled. Solace Corp would remain under my control. Congratulations, Tom said. You won. Yeah, I replied, looking around my empty house. I won. But victory, I was learning, sometimes felt a lot like loss. 3 months later, Solace Corp had stabilized. The stock price had recovered. We'd replaced the employees who'd left, and I'd hired a new management team that understood the difference between personal relationships and professional responsibilities. Rick had moved to another city, supposedly to start fresh somewhere that didn't include daily reminders of his brief tenure as a corporate executive. I heard through family connections that he and Alara had broken up, though I didn't know the details and didn't want to. Alara had started her own consulting business, helping small tech companies with marketing and business development. According to industry gossip, she was doing well, building the kind of independent success she'd always wanted, and I was sitting in my office at Solace Corp, looking out at a city view I'd worked 15 years to earn, running a company that was more successful than ever. I should have felt vindicated. I should have felt proud. I should have felt like justice had been served. Instead, I mostly felt tired. The intercom buzzed. Mr. Solace, your 3:00 appointment is here. I checked my calendar. Another reporter, this one from a national business magazine, wanting to do a follow-up story on the Solace Corp management transition. 6 months later, and people were still fascinated by the story of the tech executive who'd fired his wife and brother in the same afternoon. Send them in. The reporter was older than Jennifer Morrison had been, more experienced, with the kind of seasoned professionalism that suggested he'd covered bigger scandals than mine. Mr. Solace, thank you for your time. I wanted to follow up on the situation from earlier this year. How would you assess the company's recovery? I looked out at the city skyline, at the empire I'd built and defended and ultimately kept. We're stronger than we were before, I said. More focused, more disciplined, more committed to our core mission. And personally? How are you doing personally? I thought about that question. How was I doing personally? I had my company back, I had my house back, I had my life back. But I was also divorced, estranged from my brother, and spending most of my evenings alone in a house that felt more like a fortress than a home. I'm doing fine, I said. Better than fine. I'm exactly where I want to be. The reporter made notes, probably sensing that there was more to the story than what I was telling him. Any regrets about how you handled the situation? I considered the question seriously. Did I regret firing Alara and Rick? Did I regret the corporate coup that had saved my company but destroyed my family? Did I regret choosing business over personal relationships? No regrets, I said finally. Sometimes you have to make hard choices to protect what matters most. And what matters most to you? I looked around my office, at the awards on the walls and the view from the windows and the empire I'd built from nothing. Success, I said. Professional success, built on merit and hard work and doing the right thing, even when it's difficult. After the reporter left, I sat in my office as the sun set over the city, thinking about choices and consequences and the price of victory. I'd won. I'd kept my company, maintained my principles, and proven that betrayal has consequences. But I'd also learned that sometimes winning and being right aren't the same as being happy. Still, as I looked out at the city lights beginning to twinkle in the growing darkness, I knew I'd made the right choice. Solace Corp was mine, built on my vision and my work and my refusal to let anyone, even family, take it away from me. That had to be enough. It was going to have to be enough.